They said memory fades with age, but mine had never been sharper the day I decided to forget. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind where the sky looks bruised and tired, like it's been holding back tears. I was sitting by the kitchen window, folding laundry, when I heard them in the next room, my daughter Renee and her husband Marcus. Their voices were low at first, careful, like people whispering sins in church. "She doesn't even remember where she puts her keys anymore," Marcus said. Renee sighed. "It's getting worse, Marcus. Yesterday she asked me what day it was, twice." I froze, my hands buried in a towel that still smelled like lavender detergent. My heart ticked slower. They thought I couldn't hear. They thought I was losing it. Marcus's tone shifted, colder now. "We can't keep doing this. The house is in her name, but if she's declared mentally unfit, we can take control of her finances. That would make things easier for everyone." For everyone. Meaning them. My throat went dry. The towel slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor. Renee's voice broke through the ringing in my ears. "She's my mother, Marcus. I don't want to hurt her." "But you will if you don't act now," he said. "Do you really want to lose this house when she's gone? We both know what it's worth." My house. The same house I'd bought with my late husband, brick by brick, prayer by prayer, after 30 years of work at the nursing home. And now my son-in-law wanted it? That moment, something inside me turned to ice. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood still, like time had stopped, and whispered to myself, "All right then. Let's see how far you'll go." That's when I made my choice. I would let them think I was forgetting. I would let them talk, plan, and whisper. And when the time came, I'd make them confess every secret, right in front of me. That day, I started pretending to forget everything. But the truth? I remembered every single word. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and said out loud, "Let's play, Clara." I brushed my short silver curls, tied my robe, and shuffled toward the kitchen, slow, careful, like a woman unsure of her own feet. If they wanted to see weakness, I was going to give them a performance worth remembering. Renee was already at the table, sipping her coffee. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, the picture of arrogance wrapped in a pressed shirt. "Morning, Mama," Renee said, smiling. But it was that tight kind of smile, the one people use when they've already decided something about you. "Morning, baby," I replied sweetly, then paused, squinting at the clock. "What day is it again?" Marcus looked up from his phone, eyes flicking toward Renee. She tried to hide her worry, but I caught it. "It's Wednesday, Mama," she said softly. "Oh, of course, silly me," I chuckled. That was the first seed I planted. Later that afternoon, I left the milk out on the counter, on purpose. Marcus noticed first. "Clara," he said, feigning concern, "you left the milk out again. You know it'll spoil." "Oh dear, I did," I said, widening my eyes. "I must be losing my head." He smirked, just a flicker, but I saw it. That tiny little glint of triumph. Good, let him think he's winning. Days passed. I forgot names, misplaced my purse, and once forgot how to use the remote. Each time, I watched Marcus take one more step closer to comfort, one more step into the trap he didn't know I'd built. But Renee, my sweet Renee, she was different. Her worry looked real. I'd catch her watching me from across the room, her hand half raised, like she wanted to help but didn't know how. One night, after dinner, she sat beside me on the couch. "Mama," she said quietly, "if you ever feel confused or scared, I'm here, okay?" I smiled at her, genuinely this time. "I know, baby, you always wear my heart." Marcus walked in just then, and she turned away quickly. I watched him put his hand on her shoulder, firm, possessive, and something in me burned. I knew then what this was really about. It wasn't just greed, it was control. Marcus didn't just want the house, he wanted Renee, the money, the life I built, all under his name. So I decided to raise the stakes. That weekend, I called my friend Dorothy, the only one I trusted. "Dorothy," I whispered over the phone, "I need you to help me make a little show." She laughed. "Oh, Clara, what have you gotten yourself into this time?" I smiled. "A lesson, dear. A hard one, for people who think I've lost my mind." Dorothy came over 2 days later, wearing her usual bright yellow scarf and a grin that could melt winter itself. "Clara," she said, setting her purse on the counter, "you look like a woman with secrets." I chuckled. "You have no idea." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one Marcus wanted to replace with something modern. I pulled out my old notebook, the one I used to track bills, recipes, and now strategies. "I need you to be my eyes and ears," I whispered. "Marcus thinks I'm slipping. I'm going to let him think that. But while he's busy underestimating me, we're going to find out what he's planning." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "You mean you want to spy on your son-in-law?" "Not spy," I said, stirring my tea. "Observe." Dorothy grinned. "Girl, you haven't changed one bit." That afternoon, I made my first deliberate mistake. I left my phone unlocked on the coffee table with the voice recorder app open, something Marcus wouldn't notice if he was busy running his mouth. Then I told him I was going to nap in my room. An hour later, I came back quietly and picked up the phone. The red light was still blinking. That night, I listened. Marcus's voice was low but sharp, the kind that made people obey. "She's getting worse," he said. "You saw how she forgot the stove on yesterday? Renee, it's time. We can't risk her burning the house down." Renee's voice trembled. "I just don't know, Marcus. She still seems aware sometimes." "That's what's dangerous," he replied coldly. "Old people like her think they're fine until something happens. You don't want that guilt, do you?" Silence. Then Renee sighed. "No, I guess not." My heart clenched, not because of what they said, but because I heard fear in my daughter's voice. Not fear of me, but of him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning in the dark and thought about how I'd raised her to be strong, independent, kind, and how she'd fallen into the hands of a man who chipped away at all that. This wasn't just about protecting my home anymore. It was about saving my daughter. The next morning, Dorothy stopped by again. I played the recording for her, and her face went pale. "Oh, Lord," she said, "that man's got evil in him." I nodded. "He's smart, careful, but pride always trips people like him. I just have to wait for him to step too far." Dorothy smiled, a spark in her eyes. "And when he does?" I leaned back, my voice calm, almost cold. "When he does, I'll be waiting with proof." And a smile. That evening, I turned the tables another inch. While Marcus and Renee were out grocery shopping, I made a new will, one Dorothy witnessed and notarized. It didn't give Marcus a single cent. In fact, if anything ever happened to me under suspicious circumstances, everything would go straight to charity, and a full investigation would be requested. By the time they came home, the papers were locked away in my sewing room, safe under the floorboard. Marcus didn't know it, but the game had already shifted. He thought he was moving pieces on a board, but I'd built the board myself. And soon, he'd find out that every move he made only brought him closer to checkmate. The morning sunlight crept across my kitchen tiles, golden and innocent, a cruel contrast to the storm brewing beneath my roof. I could feel it, the tension in the air, the forced smiles, the way Marcus hovered whenever I touched the stove or reached for my medication. He was watching me, testing me. I played my role perfectly. When he asked what day it was, I forgot. When he handed me a glass of water, I spilled it. And when he looked at me with that smug pity, I smiled weakly, letting him believe every bit of his lie. But that night, I overheard him again, this time on the phone. His voice came from the hallway, quiet but clear. Yes, I understand. Guardianship would grant me control of her assets. I have witnesses and documentation of her forgetfulness. I froze mid-step, my hand still gripping the banister. My throat tightened, but I didn't move. Guardianship. He wanted legal control. My home, my savings, everything I'd built, under his name. When he ended the call, I tiptoed back to my room, my heart pounding against my ribs. I sat on the edge of my bed, whispering to myself, "Not today, Clara. You fought too hard to lose now." The next morning, I drove to the community center, careful not to tell anyone where I was going. I hadn't driven in months. Marcus always offered to help, but I still knew the roads better than my own wrinkles. I met with Mrs. Callahan, a retired social worker who now volunteered helping seniors understand their rights. After I explained what was happening, she looked at me over her glasses. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "he's setting you up for an evaluation. If they declare you unfit, you'll lose everything." "I know," I replied calmly. "That's why I need to look unfit until it counts." She blinked. "You're playing him. I surviving him." For the next week, I took it further. When Marcus mentioned a doctor's appointment, I agreed sweetly. I knew what he was doing, psychological assessment. At the clinic, I pretended to forget my birthday, my address, even my daughter's middle name. The doctor scribbled notes, and Marcus sat there with his false concern. But as I left, I dropped something accidentally, a folded paper that looked like a grocery list. What he didn't notice was that it was actually a note addressed to the doctor. "I am of sound mind. I'm pretending memory loss for my own safety. Please keep this confidential and record that the patient appears coherent. I signed it, Clara Johnson." When Marcus asked what the doctor said afterward, I shrugged. "Oh, I don't remember much, baby, but he was kind." He smiled, satisfied. Days later, Renee came home early while Marcus was on a call in his office. "Mom," she said softly, "are you okay? You seem off lately." I looked at her, really looked. Her face was tired, her smile strained. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, fear. "I'm fine, baby," I said, touching her hand, "but you are not." She didn't answer, but I saw it, the small flicker of truth. I wanted to scream, to tell her to run, to wake up, but not yet, not until I had proof. That night, Marcus came into my room uninvited. "I've scheduled another appointment," he said, his voice falsely gentle. "It's important, Clara, for your health." I looked up from my knitting. "Of course, Marcus," I said softly, "whatever you think is best." He nodded, smug and certain. When he left, I whispered to the quiet room, "You think you're moving pieces, but I'm the one holding the board." Then I opened my drawer and pulled out my hidden notebook. Every lie, every call, every accident, all written, dated, recorded. Marcus thought I was fading, but in truth, I had never been sharper. The morning of the second evaluation arrived with cruel brightness. Marcus was already pacing in the hallway, dressed in his perfect suit, the one he wore when pretending to be a devoted son-in-law. "Ready, Clara?" he asked, with that same syrupy tone that made my stomach twist. I smiled faintly. "Of course, dear, you're always taking such good care of me." If he noticed the hint of steel in my voice, he didn't show it. The clinic was in the next town over, small and sterile. A woman named Dr. Simmons greeted us, clipboard in hand, a polite professional smile on her face. She led me to her office and closed the door, leaving Marcus outside. I sat down carefully, folding my hands in my lap. Dr. Simmons looked up. "Mrs. Johnson, I just want to confirm, are you comfortable answering some questions today?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I am, doctor, but before we start, I think there's something you should know." I slid a small flash drive across the table. Her brows knit. "What is this?" "Audio recordings," I said quietly, "of my son-in-law attempting to manipulate my diagnosis, falsify memory loss, and gain control of my estate. Please listen before you file your report." Her pen froze midair. "You're saying—" "I'm saying," I interrupted softly, "that I've been pretending to forget, to protect myself." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Johnson." When we left the clinic, Marcus was practically glowing. "How'd it go?" he asked, helping me into the car. "Oh, I think it went wonderfully," I said, my lips curling. He didn't notice. He was too busy dreaming of ownership papers and signatures that would never come. 2 days later, he received a call. I was sitting at the kitchen table when it came. He put the phone on speaker without realizing. "Yes, this is Marcus Johnson," he said confidently. Dr. Simmons's voice came through, crisp and cold. "Mr. Johnson, I wanted to inform you that after my evaluation, I've concluded that Mrs. Johnson is mentally sound and capable of managing her affairs. In fact, she appears unusually perceptive for her age." The silence that followed was delicious. Marcus stammered, That can't be right. She forgets things." "I saw no evidence of that," the doctor replied sharply. "In fact, I believe someone has been trying to manipulate her situation. The authorities will be in contact for follow-up." His hand trembled as he ended the call. He turned toward me, his face pale, his mask slipping. He began. I tilted my head, smiling sweetly. "What's wrong, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." That night, I heard him arguing with Renee in the living room. "Do you understand what she's done?" he hissed. "She's turning this house against me." Renee's voice was trembling. "Marcus, please, she's my mother. You can't keep doing this." He slammed something, a chair maybe, and stormed out. Renee came to my room minutes later, her eyes red. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't know what's happening. He's not the man I thought he was." I took her hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. Now you see what I've seen all along." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom." I squeezed her fingers gently. "Don't be sorry, baby. Just be smart. He's scared now, and scared men make mistakes." Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Dr. Simmons, confirming that my case was being reviewed for financial abuse and coercion. I folded it neatly, placed it in my journal, and whispered to the quiet room. "The mask has cracked. Now let's see what crawls out." The house had grown quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, as if waiting for something to break. Marcus no longer looked me in the eye. He spent his days on the phone, muttering behind closed doors, pretending everything was normal. But I could feel the tension in every slammed cabinet, every forced good morning. Renee tried to hold everything together, bless her heart. She'd make breakfast and hum softly, pretending the air wasn't thick with secrets. But guilt has a sound, and I could hear it in every note. One afternoon, I found Marcus in the garage. He was shredding papers, dozens of them, his hands shaking. "Cleaning up, dear?" I asked from the doorway. He spun around, eyes wide. "Clara, you shouldn't be here." "Why not? It's my house, unless you've forgotten." He forced a smile. "You're confused again. You should rest." I chuckled, low and even. "You keep telling me that, Marcus. Maybe you're the one who needs to rest." For a moment, his mask cracked. Rage flashed across his face. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He dropped the papers into a black trash bag. "Stay out of my way, Clara." "Oh, I intend to," I said softly, "for now." That night, I made tea and sat in the living room with my notebook. It had become my ritual, documenting every word, every slip, every proof. I titled the page, "Evidence, Day 37." I noted the times, the voices, the fragments of conversations I overheard. He was trying to move money. I didn't know where, yet, but I would. The next day, I called my old friend Loretta, a retired court clerk who still had plenty of friends in the system. "Loretta," I said, keeping my voice low, "remember when you told me to call if things ever felt wrong?" "Clara, honey," she said immediately, "what's he done now?" I told her everything about the fake forgetfulness, the recordings, the doctor's report. There was a long pause, then a sharp inhale. "You've built quite the case, girl. You always were clever." I smiled. I learned from the best. She promised to make a few calls, discreet ones. That evening, I found an envelope slipped under my bedroom door. Inside, a single sheet of paper. It read, "If you don't drop the act, you'll regret it." No signature, but the handwriting was his. I'd seen it on every bill, every check he'd signed, on behalf of the family. I held it between my fingers, then calmly placed it in a new folder, Threats. The next morning, 2 officers arrived at the house. Marcus nearly tripped over himself coming down the stairs. "Mr. Johnson," one of them asked, "we're here to ask a few questions about financial inconsistencies and potential elder coercion." Renee froze at the kitchen counter. Marcus's face drained of color. I think there's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. The officer raised a brow. "Then you'll have no problem coming down to the station to clear it up." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. I gave him a small smile. "Don't worry, Marcus. I'll keep the kettle warm for when you get back." When the door closed behind them, Renee sat down across from me, shaking. "Mom, did you do this?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, sweetheart. He did this to himself. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it." Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they weren't just from sadness. They were from relief. That night, I sat by the window with my tea, listening to the wind move through the trees. It wasn't silence anymore. It was peace. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine again. Still, I knew this wasn't over. People like Marcus don't vanish quietly. They come back, angry, desperate. And I would be ready. Sometimes strength isn't about fighting harder. It's about waiting until the enemy runs out of lies. They say the loudest noise comes after the calm, and they were right. Marcus may have been taken away that morning, but his shadow still lingered inside every corner of that house. For 2 weeks, the quiet was almost unbearable. No shouting, no slamming doors, just the hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of my own thoughts. Renee stayed with me, trying to piece her world back together. She barely spoke. Sometimes I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wall like it might explain where her life went wrong. "Baby," I told her one morning, "you can't fix everything he broke, but you can stop letting him break you." She looked up at me, her eyes swollen from crying. "I don't even know who I am without him, Mama." "You're my daughter," I said, taking her hands in mine, "and that's more than enough." But the peace didn't last. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, my phone rang. A deep male voice spoke on the other end. Mrs. Johnson, this is Detective Hayes. We've detained your son-in-law for questioning, but he's posted bail. I closed my eyes. You're saying he's free? For now, but don't worry, we're keeping an eye on him. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for a long time, feeling the air grow heavy again. The storm wasn't over. It was circling back. That night, I heard something, a faint click outside my bedroom window. When I looked through the curtain, the yard was empty, but the motion light had turned on. The next morning, I found muddy boot prints near the porch. Not mine, not Renee's. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, I went to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and smiled. "All right, Marcus," I whispered. "You want to play games? Let's play." I spent that afternoon preparing. Loretta came over with her laptop and a stack of folders. "You sure you want to go deeper into this, Clara?" "Sweetheart," I said, "I've spent my whole life surviving men like him. Now I'm learning to win." We set up cameras, real ones this time, around the house, the kind that streamed directly to Loretta's tablet. Then I placed a small voice recorder near the front door, just in case he tried something bold. The following night, the trap sprung itself. A noise, soft but deliberate. The front door creaked open. I didn't move. I stayed in bed, breathing slow, eyes half closed, pretending to sleep. I heard the floorboards groan, slow footsteps. Then his voice, barely a whisper. "You thought you could ruin me, old woman?" He was close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. I reached under the pillow and pressed the button on the small remote Loretta had given me. A faint click. Cameras on. Then, out loud, I said, calm and steady, "Marcus, the police will be here in 5 minutes. You might want to sit down." He froze. "You're bluffing?" I smiled into the darkness. "Try me." Within minutes, red and blue lights flooded the living room. Loretta had already called 911 after the motion sensors went off. The officers came in fast. Marcus didn't even resist. He just stood there, trembling, his hands still on the doorknob. "Mr. Johnson," the officer said, "you're under arrest for violating a restraining order and attempted intimidation." As they led him away, he looked at me one last time, rage twisting his face. "You'll regret this, Clara?" I tilted my head. "Maybe, but you'll regret it first." When the door shut, I sat down at the table, heart pounding, but my face calm. Renee came down the stairs, clutching her robe. "Is it over?" I looked at her, my daughter, broken but still breathing, and said softly, "Not over, but we've taken back the night." She fell into my arms, sobbing, and for the first time, I let myself cry too. Later, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the women who had ever been told they were too old, too weak, too late to fight back. I wanted to tell them, "No, baby, it's never too late to remember who you are." Because sometimes pretending to forget is the smartest way to make the guilty speak. Justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it walks through your own front door, wearing handcuffs. The courthouse smelled like cold coffee and old wood, a place where truth and lies shared the same air. I hadn't been inside one since my divorce over 30 years ago. Back then, I was a scared young woman begging a judge for peace. Now, I was here for something different, justice. Renee sat beside me, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked younger than she had in weeks, but her eyes still carried that deep bruise of betrayal. Across the aisle sat Marcus, slick suit, fake smile, eyes full of venom. He didn't look at me, but I felt his stare like heat on my skin. The prosecutor leaned over and whispered, "You ready, Mrs. Johnson?" I nodded. Born ready. When my name was called, I walked to the stand, every step steady, my cane tapping softly like a metronome of resolve. They swore me in, and I sat down, back straight, heart strong. "Mrs. Johnson," the lawyer began, Can you tell the court what happened on the night of March 8th? I took a slow breath. He came to my house, uninvited, angry. He thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. The courtroom grew quiet. Even Marcus stopped pretending to smile. He whispered things, I continued. Ugly things. He said I'd ruined him, that I'd pay. But I wasn't afraid. I'd already been afraid once, years ago, and I swore never again. The prosecutor nodded. You mentioned you were prepared that night. How so? I smiled just slightly. Let's just say I learned a thing or two from raising 3 children alone. You keep records, you stay alert, and when danger comes knocking, you make sure someone's listening. There was a ripple of murmurs in the gallery. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The defense tried to twist my words. Mrs. Johnson, his lawyer said, you claim you're hard of hearing, yet you heard my client whisper from across the room? I tilted my head. Oh, honey, I never said I couldn't hear. I said I pretended not to. A few people chuckled quietly. Even the judge cracked a faint smile. I leaned forward slightly. Sometimes you learn more by listening than by talking, especially when people think you're too old to notice what's going on. The defense lawyer blinked, realizing the trap I'd just closed around her client. During recess, I stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, smelled like rain and freedom. Renee came to my side. Mama, how are you holding up? I squeezed her hand. Baby, I've been holding up my whole life. This is just another day. She smiled weakly. You always make it sound so easy. I looked out over the courthouse steps, remembering my younger self, 27, 3 kids, a husband who disappeared when the money ran out. It wasn't easy then, but surviving becomes a habit when you've got no other choice. I ain't strong because I want to be, I said softly. I'm strong because nobody else was gonna do it for me. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, sipping tea while the rain whispered against the window. The day had been long, but I felt light, lighter than I had in years. I looked around at the photos on the wall, my children as babies, my first home, my late mother holding me on a porch long gone. Every frame told a story, not perfection, but persistence. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. This was about every time someone underestimated me, every time I'd been talked over, ignored, or treated like I was invisible. I whispered to the empty room. They thought I forgot everything, but I remember every single thing that made me who I am. The next day, the jury was dismissed for deliberation. The wait felt endless. Renee kept pacing. I sat quietly, knitting, like I was back on my porch, waiting for laundry to dry. Finally, the judge returned. The foreman stood and said, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." Renee gasped. I closed my eyes. Marcus turned to look at me, his mask of confidence cracking. For a second, I saw it. Fear, the kind I'd known too well. The bailiff took him away, and I just sat there, silent. Justice didn't roar. It whispered, soft and final. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Johnson, how does it feel to win?" I smiled, tired but proud. "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about remembering who you are, even when everyone else tries to make you forget." That night, Renee and I cooked dinner together. Something simple, warm, the kind of meal that fills the soul more than the stomach. She looked at me and said, "Mama, thank you for everything." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "Baby, don't thank me. Just live better. That's the only thanks a mother ever needs." As I went to bed, I thought about the woman I used to be. Quiet, obedient, tired. That woman was gone. Now I was Clara Johnson, 60 years old, full of scars, full of stories, and finally free. Pretending to forget was my disguise, but remembering That's how I won. The morning after the verdict, I woke up before the sun. The house was silent, too silent. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up afraid. No footsteps, no whispers, no pretending. Just the steady sound of rain tapping against the window and my heartbeat finding its rhythm again. I made myself a cup of coffee, black and strong, the way my mother used to drink it. I sat by the kitchen window, the one that faced the magnolia tree in the yard. Its white blossoms were heavy with dew, bending under the weight, but still standing tall. That tree had always reminded me of myself, scarred, weathered, but rooted. For the first time in a long time, I whispered, "It's over." Then I laughed softly, because I knew it wasn't really over. It was different. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood began to change. People waved when I passed. Some whispered. Others looked at me with that mix of curiosity and respect that comes when someone's story becomes known beyond their fence. A lady from church stopped me outside the grocery store. "Clara," she said, "you showed real courage standing up to that man." I smiled. "Honey, courage ain't something you wait for. It's something you decide on." At home, I started clearing out drawers and closets. It wasn't just spring cleaning, it was soul cleaning. Old letters, bills, photographs, the evidence of a life built from scraps. I found an old journal from when my kids were little, its pages yellowed and soft. On one page, I had written, "One day, they'll understand why I had to be both mama and daddy." I ran my hand over those words, my throat tightening. That day had finally come, though not the way I'd hoped. Renee came by often. She cooked dinner, cleaned the porch, tried to fill the silence with laughter. One afternoon, she sat across from me and said quietly, "Mama, I still don't understand how you forgave him." I looked at her for a long moment, because I had to. She frowned. "But after everything he did..." "Baby," I interrupted gently, "forgiveness ain't for him, it's for me. You can't carry poison in your heart and call it strength. You gotta let it go to live." Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded, understanding. At night, I started writing again. Not just letters, but my story. The whole truth. From the first time I felt invisible to the moment I chose to stop being silent. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it. Maybe Renee would one day. Maybe some other woman who needed to remember her worth. But writing it down felt like setting my spirit free. Each word was a confession, a prayer, and a promise. One afternoon, I walked down to the park near the old elementary school where my kids used to play. A little boy was pushing his grandma's wheelchair down the path, both of them laughing. For a moment, I stopped and watched, smiling to myself. That was love, the kind that didn't need grand gestures or apologies, just presence. I realized something then. For all the hurt, the lies, the fear, life had still given me beauty. It was in the sound of laughter, the smell of rain, the way the sunlight hit the grass. Later that evening, I sat on my porch swing as the sun dipped low behind the trees. The air smelled like fresh rain and freedom. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the trial, the strength it took to rise again. I whispered to the quiet world around me. I remembered everything. Every lesson, every wound, every moment I thought I couldn't go on. And that's how I survived. As night fell, I closed my eyes and finally rested. Not because I was tired, but because I was at peace. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was fighting anymore. I had nothing left to prove. The world had seen my scars, and instead of hiding them, I wore them like armor. When I went inside, I looked once more at the mirror in the hallway, the same mirror I'd avoided for months. This time, I smiled. "Clara," I said to my reflection, "you made it." They thought forgetting was weakness, but remembering everything, that's how I became whole. The morning light poured through my curtains like a quiet blessing. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the day ahead. I welcomed it. I was 60 now, but my heart felt lighter than it had in decades. The fear, the anger, the silence, they no longer lived in me. They had burned away, leaving only strength. I walked out onto the porch with a cup of coffee and my old notebook. The porch swing creaked as I sat down, just like it had when the kids were little. I could almost hear their laughter in the breeze. Funny how memory can hurt and heal at the same time. That afternoon, I went to the community center where I used to volunteer before everything fell apart. The director, a kind woman named Denise, looked surprised to see me. "Clara," she said with a wide smile, "it's been a while." "Too long," I replied, "but I'm back and I've got something to share." I told her I wanted to start a weekly group for women. Not therapy, not gossip, but truth. A safe place for stories that were too heavy to carry alone. She nodded immediately. We've needed something like that for a long time. That's how the circle began. 10 women, all different ages, races, and stories, but each carrying a wound they thought no one would understand. Every Thursday, we sat in that little yellow room, sipping tea and trading pieces of our souls. Some cried, some laughed, all healed, slowly, bravely. And every time I told my story, the betrayal, the pretending, the remembering, I felt the chains loosen a little more. Renee helped me design flyers for the group. "You sure about this, Mama?" she asked, watching me tape one to the cafe window. I smiled. "Baby, I'm not just sure. I'm ready." She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not just as her mother, but as a woman who had survived, learned, and transformed. One evening after a meeting, a young woman named Mariah came up to me. "My mama's been quiet her whole life," she said softly, "but after hearing you, she told me something she's kept inside for 30 years. Tears filled her eyes. You helped her remember too." That night, I went home and cried, not from pain, but gratitude, because my story had finally found its purpose. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Mark. The handwriting was shaky, the words uneven. He wrote that he'd started counseling, that he was sorry, not the kind of sorry that fixes things, but the kind that faces truth. He ended the letter with, "I understand now. I see what I became. Thank you for surviving me." I folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of my journal, not out of love, but closure. Some things don't need answers. They just need endings. On my 61st birthday, Renee threw a small party at the house. The kitchen smelled like peach cobbler and barbecue, the radio played soft jazz, and for once, laughter didn't sting. It felt real again. When the candles flickered in front of me, everyone clapped, and someone shouted, "Make a wish." I didn't close my eyes. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't wishing for something to happen. I was thankful for what already had. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch again. The stars above looked endless. The magnolia tree swayed gently in the warm wind. I whispered, "I pretended to forget everything, but remembering saved me." The cicadas hum, the world kept turning, and I smiled, really smiled. In the end, my story wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about power, the quiet kind that grows in the shadows, the strength that comes when you remember who you are after everyone else has forgotten. Sometimes pretending helps you survive the storm, but remembering, that's how you rebuild after it's gone. And that's how Clara finally became whole again.